What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Not So Stupid podcast. Today's episode, we're going to be breaking down how to train to look good, very simply. So, optimizing your training program so that you can get the best physique possible. And the organization and structure and creation of a training program is really super underlooked. A well thought out, well made training program is really kind of a piece of art, and it's a craft in itself. And I think not enough people appreciate or recognize that. I feel like a lot of people think they can throw together a bunch of exercises, if it's a chest day or a leg day, just do a bunch of chest workouts, do a bunch of leg workouts, and get yourself tired, feel a good pump. If you're sore the next day, you're feeling then you did good. But it's really a lot more nuanced than that, and there's a little more thought that should go behind a good training program. And we're going to break down all of the reasons why. But I think first and foremost, understanding your goal and what perspective you should have when going into the gym to train and when choosing a training program is really important. Whether your goal is fat loss, whether your goal is muscle building, you want to have the primary goal of hypertrophy, which is challenging your muscles to rebuild themselves and grow, or maintain muscles. The goal shouldn't be training for calorie burn. And this might sound a little counterintuitive for a lot of people because they think, I train so that I can lose weight, I train to burn calories, but I'm going to get into a few reasons why this is important. But again, I want to reiterate, the goal of training shouldn't be to burn as many calories as possible. The goal of training should be to maintain as much muscle as possible if you're in a fat loss phase, as well as build muscle, hypertrophy. Whether your goal is hypertrophy or fat loss, that should kind of be a secondary goal always. For fat loss, the main goal is maintain as much muscle as possible. You never want to lose muscle. And wanting to explain why that's so important. For one, regardless, when we look at how your metabolism is built up, right? If you've ever listened to the metabolism episode, you kind of have a good idea of this, but for the most part, you're burning a very minimal amount of calories from training and cardio. Whatever you're doing, anything you're doing, it's only 5% of the calories at most that you burn throughout the week. A majority of your calories, 60 to 80% of your calories, which is a big range, but it's different for everybody, it comes from your basal metabolic rate. So just all the tissue on your body needing to maintain itself takes calories to burn. And the way you can improve your basal metabolic rate, so burn more calories at rest, burn more calories by maintaining more tissue, is by building more lean muscle tissue. The more lean muscle tissue you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate is, the more calories you burn at rest, the more calories you're able to consume without gaining weight. It's a really great trade-off. So trying to focus on hypertrophy, trying to focus on maintaining muscle is the best way to look good in the short term, or in the long term, as well as in the long term, being able to eat more calories without risk of gaining fat or gaining too much weight. So that's one thing. In relation to your metabolism, you really should focus on just building as much muscle or maintaining as much muscle as possible because it's going to be best for your metabolism in the short and long term. Not to mention people that have more muscle are healthier, are at lower risk of different diseases and conditions, and can have just more longevity to them. The benefits of having more muscle on your body cannot be overstated, and just making sure that you can prioritize that regardless of what your goal is key. Now, in more rational terms, we're going to go to what, looking good for fat loss. If your goal is to become a smaller person, right? I don't want to say weight loss, but just becoming a smaller person, you want to have some sort of definition on your body. You don't want to look the same as you do now, but just smaller. You want to get some shape to yourself. You want to have some round edges around your shoulder. You want to have some lines coming in where your muscles end. You want to show that you actually work out. You want to show that you're somebody that lifts, and you want to show that not just for other people, but you want to show that for yourself. You want to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, I work out, I lift, I look good, and I have the muscle to show for it. If your pursuit in training, if your main goal is only burning calories and not building or maintaining muscle, you're only going to get smaller without gaining definition. You need muscle to to have that definition, to look good. So more often than not, when people go through a fat loss phase or with the goal of fat loss, they focus a lot more on the calorie burn and becoming smaller. But if you're gaining muscle or maintaining muscle throughout that process, you can get leaner quicker, for one, because you're focusing on the pursuit of muscle, and you don't need to lose as much fat to show the muscle because you're growing muscle underneath it faster. And two is, I kind of forgot number two when I was talking because I got stuck on that first point. And two, you put yourself in a position where it's, again, going to be harder for you to regain the weight because you've put on such a lean amount of muscle. Even if you gain half a pound of body fat because you've had a lot more muscle, it won't be as noticeable, and you'll be able to keep the look that you earned for yourself a lot easier. And now another point specifically for fat loss is that when we are in the goal of losing fat, losing weight, we're in a calorie deficit. So we aren't getting enough calories to maintain the muscle tissue that we have on our body. Now, the only thing that is going to provide a stimulus for our muscles to maintain itself while we are in a diet, in a deficit, in a fat loss phase, is training. Nothing else you do, the diet you have without training isn't going to stimulate your muscles. Cardio isn't really going to stimulate your muscles to maintain their size. They'll stimulate them in fatigue sense, but not so much in a maintaining muscle tissue sense. And I mean, nothing you do outside of training will actually stimulate your muscles in a way that's going to help your body recognize that, hey, we need these muscles to stay because we use them pretty often. Nothing else you do is going to do that unless you have a very laborious job. You're not going to experience it. If you have a desk job, you're not using really any muscles to type emails. So it's not going to be enough to not lose muscle. So training, shifting the perspective of training from calorie burning activity to something that is going to help me maintain muscle, stimulate my muscles so that I don't lose muscle, I'm gaining muscle, and I'm going to have muscle definition by the end of this fat loss phase is key. Obviously, for hypertrophy, you want to focus on muscle stimulus, and training is the best way to gain muscle tissue. But more so talking for fat loss, people that have the goal of fat loss, making your training revolve around the idea of hypertrophy and building muscle is key. So having that perspective when you go into the gym, having that perspective when you're choosing a training program is the most important thing. That's the goal that you're trying to accomplish by training, by going to the gym, by putting in the reps, by putting on weight, putting weight on the bar, and progressively overloading. So that is the first thing. Making sure that you have that perspective is, again, the most important thing. So now that you have that perspective, you're going into the gym now with the goal of challenging your muscles and creating a stimulus in a way that's going to build muscle tissue or maintain muscle. How can we do that properly, right? How can we structure our training program in a way that is going to help elicit this as effectively as possible with the time that you're going to put it? There's kind of a hierarchy to this. And there's a few variables. There's a lot of nuance, that the average person doesn't necessarily need to know, but for the most part, I'm going to cover all the key things that are important when putting together a training program. When I make a training program for my clients, the first thing that most people turn to is intensity and volume, right? And volume is how many, there's a couple ways to define volume, but in the kind of physique development world, the best way to look at it, and the most commonly referred to way to look at it, is how many sets per muscle group you're doing. So for instance, throughout a training program week, I might do 10 sets of pushing movements, horizontal pushing movements, 10 chest movements per week. So that's 10 sets of training for chest every single week. And you basically break that down for every muscle group. That's how volume is usually defined for the aesthetic world. Intensity is how, is usually improperly defined as how hard you're working, how much sweat you're getting, how high your heart rate is. I think that's a misconception that's come around because of all the group fitness classes and heart rate monitors. People want to challenge you to go to that high heart rate zone, which is good and it's important, but it's distorted the the actual definition of intensity when it comes to training. When it comes to training, intensity is actually defined as how much neurological stimulus, how much neurological demand is being placed on you, which is translated from how much weight you're actually lifting. When you're lifting heavy, there's a higher neurological demand for that. So having a higher intensity actually means just lifting heavier for that same set and rep pattern. So having a high rate of perceived exertion. So for instance, if you have 5 sets of 5 of a workout, that's a very common split or a set and rep range for compound lifts, squats, overhead press, bench, things like that. You are only doing 5 reps. So the weight you put on the bar is going to be really heavy compared to doing 12 or 15 reps of that same exercise. That's a high intensity movement. And getting close to failure with those 5 reps. So, doing 200 pounds for 5 reps, and at most you can do 6 reps if you were to really push yourself for 200 pounds, is key in managing that intensity or in choosing your intensity. You don't want to just do 150 pounds, something you could do 12 or 15 times for 5 sets of 5. You're really not getting the most out of that. And we'll get into that a little more as we define intensity and volume deeper in terms of how to program it. But before intensity and volume even play a role in your training, you need to choose the right exercises for you to do. And this might sound kind of obvious, but this is actually very overlooked because I think people will turn to a program that someone else is doing and they start doing these exercises that they can't perform properly. They don't get a proper stimulus from training with. They don't have a good form with it. They don't have good control of the movement, whether it's because it's too advanced of a movement or it's not good for how their body is set up, right? Like certain types of squats aren't good for some people because of the way their femur and pelvis interact. So like a narrow stance squat can be really hard on their hips, hit their hip flexors, hit their low back, as opposed to really stimulating the quads the way that they should. So, knowing what exercises are good for you, because you can execute them better, you can execute them better, achieve a better muscle stimulus from them, and ultimately challenge your muscles in a way that is actually going to demand change from them, whether that's building muscle tissue or maintaining the muscle tissue that you have, is going to be key. So before you even try to play with intensity, play with volume, increase intensity, you need to make sure that you're picking the right exercises for this. You need to make sure that you are choosing, again, exercises that are properly stimulating for you and helping you achieve true muscle fatigue, as opposed to just exhausting neurological and cardiovascular exhaustion. Because at the end of the day, the most important variable, the most important thing is how you perform each and every single rep in the gym. If you do a set of 5 reps and each rep had your full concentration, you felt the intended muscle stretch and contract for all 5 of those reps, that means you had a good set. If you repeat that 5 times, you're gonna have 5 good sets. You repeat that a number of days in the week, you're gonna have 3-4 good training sessions, and that's gonna compound into the change in your physique that you're looking for. You want to have what is called effective volume in your training. Effective volume being volume that adequately stimulates your muscles, creates good muscular tension, localized muscular tension for the muscle that you're working, the intended muscle that you're working, and stimulating the hypertrophy so that you're at least correctly calculating your volume, if not correctly demanding change in your body. So simplifying all of that, you basically want to choose exercises that you feel the stretch and contraction of the muscle that you're working. Every single time that you do it, you're able to perform it well without breaking form. And you're able to do that week to week as you progress in weight, because you don't want junk volume. You want that effective volume, the volume that's actually challenging your muscles, that's actually creating muscular tension as you go through the movement. Without that, again, you're getting junk volume. You're not actually challenging your muscles enough. And even though you're getting tired in the gym, you're not going to see the changes in your body that you want. So before setting up the intensity, before playing with the volume, adding sets, adding weight, you need to make sure the exercise that you're choosing to do that with, the exercise that you're adding sets and reps to, that you're adding load to, is something that you can perform properly for the given rep range at that given intensity. And again, this is different from person to person. So definitely something to experiment with, but if you know you need to do a horizontal pushing movement, barbell bench press doesn't feel right for you, you don't get as good of a chest stimulus from it as you would with dumbbells or with the machine, opting for dumbbells or the machine might be the better move there if the goal is again physique based as opposed to strength based, where a barbell might be more useful. So that's the first thing, making sure that you have the right exercises and you have the proper execution of those exercises. From there, then you can play around with volume and intensity and see what's going to be working best for you. Generally speaking, there is like a proper rep range that a set range that you're going to go through to prescribe or create your training program. I mentioned earlier, volume is defined as the number of sets per muscle group you do on a weekly basis during your weekly training program. For larger muscles, which are going to be your back, your chest, your legs, your glutes, the really big stuff, you want to have more of these because again, they're bigger muscles. They're able to withstand more, because they're bigger, they have more endurance, they have more strength. You're going to need to do more to them to elicit change and create or at least maintain the muscle that you have. So aiming for 10 to 20 sets per muscle of these larger muscles in a weekly basis for every microcycle of the training program, which is again how many days you go in the week, is going to be key here. Maintaining muscle is going to be on the low end, challenging muscle is going to be on the high end. But I do want to say, just because you're doing 20 sets doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. You want to find that sweet spot for you. 10 to 20 set range is a really big difference. That's a difference of 2 to 5 exercises on a weekly basis that you could be adding. You don't want to do too much, or else you're just gonna stress your body out too hard and actually see an opposite effect. You want to have a good place where you're recovering properly from the volume that you're choosing. Because at some point there is a max recoverable volume that you can have. If you do more training beyond that, the benefit from it starts going down. You actually don't benefit much, if at all, from it, as you would by staying a few sets shorter. So the more experienced you are, the more sets you're gonna need to maintain and build muscle. The less experienced you are, the less you're gonna need. I would always say start with less when you're designing your program. Start with fewer sets that you can do, and build up as time goes on. Again, you don't need to do more. Don't feel forced to do more. It's always better to do less effectively, and we'll get into that when we talk about intensity in a little bit, than it is to do more poorly. Now, I mentioned the big muscles. The smaller muscle groups are a similar range. It's 5 to 15 sets per muscles. And those are going to be, your arms, the different parts of your shoulder, your calves, your abs. 5 to 15 sets in a week is plenty. Again, because these are smaller muscle groups, they're accessory groups, they don't do most of the work, they don't have as much, they don't generate as much power, they don't have as much endurance as the larger muscle groups. They don't need to do as much stimulus. And again, this is a big range, 10 sets between the lower and upper end. Make sure you're starting small and then building up from there. You don't need as much as you think to maintain muscle, and you don't need also as much as you think to build muscle. You don't need to just throw on more and more and more just for the sake of throwing more. You do want to start small and start slow before building and adding on. So that is volume. Now, volume and intensity are kind of related. They're on par with each other because the intensity you do each set at is important to know and recognize, right? And this is where the RPE scale comes in and how close you should be to failure for every, where the RPE scale comes in, or the reps in reserve, the RIR scale comes in to help you gauge how much weight you should be doing for each set. Generally speaking, there is an effective range for muscle stimulus where if you need to be within a certain proximity to failure. So actually, let me just finish this and I'll explain it more. You need to be within a certain proximity to failure to get that proper muscular tension, that proper muscle stimulus to elicit a response from your body to maintain that muscle or build that muscle. So there is, as the example I mentioned earlier, you're doing a 5x5 workout. You have 6 reps, you choose a weight that you can do 6 times for all 5 of those sets. That's an RPE 9 and keeping 1 rep in reserve. So if you wanted to do 6, you could. You have that 1 rep in reserve. But if you couldn't do, if 7 was asked of you, if there was a gun to your head and I said, hey, you got to do 7 reps, you physically could not do 7. That's the type of intensity that we're looking for. And that's the type of intensity you should try to have with at least the first half of your workout. You want to be within 0 to 2 RIR, 8.5 to 10 RPE for the main exercises, your main strength exercises, which is usually going to be the first 3 exercises of your workout. After that, you still want to be in the 0 to 4 rep range. This 0 to 4, 0 to 5 in some instances is the ideal rep in reserve range that you want to aim for all of your movements. You want to be really close to failure, where if you're doing 10 reps of something, you would only be able to do 4 more reps max if I, again, had a gun to your head and wanted you to do that. That's the type of intensity you should be lifting at. And that's the type of volume, the types of sets you should be doing every single workout for every single day outside of deload weeks. And deload weeks are going to be really important. But before we get into that, so you have, let's say, 10 sets of chest exercises throughout the week. All of those sets should be within 0 to 4 reps in reserve. So you should be able to go within 4 reps of failure for every single set, but not quite hitting failure every single time. Now, what does failure look like, and how can you gauge this for yourself? Because in a lot of instances, most people will think they're going as heavy as they can, but they can do more than they realize. There's been a lot of studies done on this that people will, one in particular, I've mentioned on the podcast before by Brad Schoenfeld. He challenged people to do their 10 rep max for bench press. And they said what their 10 rep max is, and they tested it out. In most instances, they did, I think it was like 85% of the participants did way more than 10 reps. Some people did twice as much as they thought they would. What their 10 rep max, what they thought their 10 rep max was actually, they were able to do 20 times. So far from their 10 rep max, they were stronger than they realized. And they were kind of holding themselves back. So it's hard to, even though like the 10 reps might feel really difficult, it doesn't mean that you're actually hitting your 10 RPE or your 0 to 1 RIR. But how can you gauge that for yourself? One, the easiest way and the best way is going to be to record yourself and see the speed of the movement that you're doing. So continuing with bench press as an example, you want to continue benching. And the last maybe 2 reps, when you're benching, your bench should actually slow down. That means your muscle is fatiguing and can't produce as much force in the time required anymore. You're running low on gas basically for that set, and you just need a rest. So if you have 5 reps in reserve, a 5x5 workout program, you got to do 5 reps of this exercise. You want to push the first 3 to 4 at the same speed. So it should take you like 1 second to go up, as an example. It could take more or less than 1 second, but the same speed for the first 3 to 4 reps. And then the last 1 to 2 reps, it should take you a little bit longer to push it all the way up while maintaining good form. And that's the key thing here. You don't want to adjust your form to push the weight up. That's putting the tension in different places. Now that's a junk volume set, or rep at least, not a whole set. You want to have that, maintain the same form and just watch until you slow down. Once you get to that slow down point, you're pretty close to your failure point. You're at 0 to 3 RIR most likely. And again, that's while maintaining good form. For the most common example of trying to push it further with bad form and not getting your true RIR and you wouldn't know this without recording yourself, is with squats and RDLs. With squats, a lot of people will start basically good morning their squats. Use good morning as a verb there. But they'll basically, instead of extending from the knees, they'll start pushing their hips back to stand up, which is an improper form of squat. You're losing all tension in the quads that way. Same thing with RDLs. They'll, on the way up, instead of extending through their hips, they might start with the spine and their low back starts getting involved, right? And that's those last few reps at that weight that you're doing, minimal glute and hamstring tension, and you're getting more low back tension. So you want to have as much stimulus in those muscles for the entire set. And once you start to slow down when doing that movement is when you know you're at that RIR. Sometimes, again, you can feel while you're doing the exercise that you are slowing down, but when you watch the video, you're not slowing down at all, and it wasn't as hard as you thought it was in your mind while you were doing it. So recording is really beneficial. It's actually the best way to do it, or have someone watch you is the best way to do it, to recognize how close to failure you are at those moments. I said that was the first way, but that's really the best. I want to say that's the most practical and the best way. The way that goes longer or takes a little bit more time, you probably have to give yourself a week, block out a week to actually properly test this out, is to go through failure on all of the exercises that you're doing, or not all the exercises, but all the major exercises at least, and do basically a strength test and do an AMRAP test for those things. So bench press, for instance, I would say, put your body weight on a bar or half your body weight on the bar, depending on how much you weigh and how much you can lift, and rep that out for as many reps as you can, until true failure, like until a spotter actually has to help you up and pick it up. And you actually have a good, clear indication of how many reps you could do of this weight, and you can plan accordingly as you choose the weight for your training program going forward. So taking the week to do a strength test and AMRAP test on the major lifts, with a variation of your body weight, half your body weight or your full body weight or 3/4 body weight, whatever, and seeing how many doing an AMRAP, seeing how many actual reps you could do at that weight, is going to give you a really good starting and sticking point to see what your true intensity, true RIR and RPE is for that rep range. And then from there, adjusting accordingly. And doing this, a couple times a year is actually really helpful. I usually suggest twice a year, every 6 months. Quarterly is good too, but more on a periodized scale, the start and end of every main phase, whether it's a fat loss phase, a deficit phase, or a muscle building phase, the start and end of those is going to be probably the best time to do it, just to see how much change you've actually made. If you're in a fat loss phase, you want to maintain muscle. Strength and muscle are directly correlated. If you maintain your strength for the weight lifted during your strength test before your fat loss phase and after, then you did a good job. You maintained your muscle because you maintained your strength for the most part. A small decrease, 5-10% isn't huge, but isn't like massively significant. But you just want to get pretty close to it. With hypertrophy, with muscle building, you want to obviously gain strength. If you gain strength when you test your strength test before the build phase and at the end of the build phase, and you were able to gain strength, then you were successfully able to build muscle. But as final notes for intensity and volume, you're going to get, again, more effective volume by doing 3 sets of a workout with 0 to 3 RIR, so being within 0 to 3 reps of failure, then doing 10 sets of a workout while being 5+ RIR. So if you just do 10 sets at like 20 pounds, it's going to take you a lot longer to actually achieve a stimulus than doing 3 sets at 50 pounds, of, let's say, dumbbell bench press. So yeah, just knowing that, understanding that, and staying within those ranges, you can do less sets more effectively and gain more out of them just by doing that. And just really focusing on quality volume versus garbage volume, and having that proper exercise execution. And if you don't have that proper execution, lowering the weight to where you do have a proper execution, or adjusting the exercise selection so that you can execute it more properly with a variation that's more comfortable to you. So when it comes to training to look good, training for physique purposes, training for aesthetic, you want to first focus on the goal of maintaining muscle or building muscle. After that, the goal is to have adequate, effective volume, quality volume in your day-to-day and week-to-week, where you're staying in a 0 to 3 RIR intensity, having high intensity for a majority of your sets, 8 to 10 sets, 80 to 90% of your sets, not 8 to 10, 80 to 90% of your sets through the week, staying at that high intensity and making sure that the quality of your exercise execution is on point, and obviously making sure to test yourself along the way. If you want help with this and want to kind of get a better understanding of what this is, you have questions following up this podcast episode, feel free to reach out to me through email or through Instagram. Instagram is @stupid.fit, STOOPID.FIT. Email is Jumha, JUMHA, @stupid.fit. And I'm more than happy to bounce ideas off of you, see how you're doing. If you want to build your own program and get some ideas from me, hey, I'm all for that. Again, love communicating, sharing this, and educating. So if you are looking for more education, or if you're looking for actual professional help and coaching with me, you can apply for a strategy call in the link in the show notes. But otherwise, thank you guys for listening to this episode. I really hope I provide a lot of value in helping you understand how to train more effectively for your goals, whether it's fat loss or hypertrophy. If you did gain a lot of value from this, please share this with a friend that could also find this valuable. And we will see you guys on the next episode.